All right. Yeah. And sometimes we forget and do it a different time. All right. Norm, are we set to stream? Whatever? All right. All right. Good morning and welcome to Bible class. Our quick fill-in Bible study today is on the time between the Testaments. Since we talked a little bit about that last week, as we finished our series on the minor prophets and talked about Malachi, and then talked about how there's this period of silence between Malachi and the New Testament. Figured this was a good fill-in, quick Bible study for today. All right, so again, Malachi is about 430, 420 BC, and is the last book in the way our Old Testament is organized. The Hebrew Old Testament ends with Chronicles, but then it's the last chronologically. Malachi is the last prophet, and so there's about little over 400 years between when Malachi ends and when especially Luke begins with the Christmas story around 4 BC-ish. So how long is 400 years? 400 years, that's the time from the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock to now, give or take a few years. A lot happens in 400 years in our country, just a little bit. Or again, 400 years, that's the length of time between the death of Martin Luther and the end of World War II. So a lot can change in 400 years, and we see that as we look at this, the time between the Testaments, or the intertestamental period too. Again, kind of a review of what happens at the end of the Old Testament, both in the Bible and then in the surrounding historical stuff. Northern kingdom's conquered a while ago. Southern kingdom of Judah is in captivity for 70 years, from about 605 BC to 537 BC, and in 537 is then when Zerubbabel, isn't that a great name? Zerubbabel returns and the temple's rebuilt. And then a little later, Ezra and Nehemiah work together. Ezra is the priest, Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king, to the Persian emperor. And so Ezra returns and as a priest tries to restore the worship practices and everything of the people. Because even though the temple's been rebuilt, the people aren't supporting it like they should, and Nehemiah and people have returned, but the walls haven't been rebuilt yet, and so that of course creates problems. And so again, so Ezra and Nehemiah are all about that return, trying to restore Judah. Again, Malachi is the last prophet, about 432, and then we get again John the Baptist starts his ministry at some point in the late 2080s. We're starting with Luke Christmas story stuff. That's 4 BC or a little before. All right, so what happens in these intervening 400 years, which even this timeline really doesn't, just skips over. So first big thing that happens is this guy. Anyone know who this guy is? Alexander the Great, right. So Alexander the Great is, he conquers Israel in 332 BC. He begins, his father, Philip of Macedon, starts conquering the areas around Greece, but then Alexander takes it to a next level. Do I have? Yeah. Again, this light green area is what his father controlled. The blue is what Alexander controlled at its greatest extent in 323 BC. So that changes everything, of course, here. Again, so he conquers Israel in 332 BC, takes control of that from the Persians. Obviously, that ends up conquering all the Persians here too, in modern-day Iran. And so the big result of this then is that there's this goal. He's got this goal of what's called Hellenization. It comes from the Greek word for Greek, Hellene, and so of making everyone Greek. And so you get lots of. Let's see. Do we see a whole? Yeah. So he starts trying to make all these peoples Greek so that they're all one culture and he can control the empire better. And he does things, he's a nice, humble guy, so he names a few cities. Alexandria, of course, the famous one in Egypt. I see one over here. There's one here, one here, one here, one here. Again, how do you get people to remember who's in charge? Well, you're living in Alexandria, so Alexander's in charge. But then Greek becomes the language that everyone in this area speaks. It becomes the common language, and the difference is then, like Homer and some of the philosophers we're familiar with are written in what's called Attic Greek, but then because of this time, this expansion, then the language changes a little bit and it becomes what's known as Koine Greek or Common Greek, and that was the trade language that everyone spoke, which then means when the disciples are writing a New Testament, you've got a language that everyone speaks that you can write in and do it. So even though they're writing in the time of the Roman Empire, they're still writing in Greek because everyone speaks Greek. All right, but then Alexander dies, and the problem is that a lot of this was held together by his personality and by the fact that he just kept moving his army to conquer things. He didn't have to, worry about pesky details like let's just, how do I actually rule this stuff that I've conquered? Or how do I keep these soldiers happy now that the war is over? No, we're going to just keep conquering stuff. So it ends up Alexander dies, and then his empire is divided among 4 of his generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And these last 2, Ptolemy and Seleucus, are the ones we're concerned with, because guess where Israel is? Right on the border between these 2 guys. And so that creates a period of tension, which of course is one of the geographical challenges or opportunities that Israel has, is that it's right on the main thoroughfare for everyone, all these empires coming through.
What was a typical lifespan for these people at about that time?
I mean, I think they usually say kind of 40, 50 years, but some of that is affected by the fact that there was so much infant mortality that just drops the average dramatically.
So
50, 60. I mean, Moses in Psalm 90 talks about 80. Right. 70 or 80 is the high points. But yeah, generally probably we'll call it 50. So, all right. So again, it's right between the territories controlled by these 2 generals. When that becomes, because again, it's in the area. Egypt comes through, Babylonians, Chalcedonians, Persians come through, Greeks and Romans come through. It's just on the way to everywhere. Poland has a similar problem in Europe. It's just in between everything. So, Germans are conquering east, well, they'll go through Poland. Russians are going west, they go through Poland. All right, so then Israel's ruled by the Ptolemies, who are based out of Egypt, and then the Seleucids, based out of Persia, again from about 323 to about 160 BC. And if you are really bored, here's a fun genealogy of how some of these people get through. So you do recognize, though, a couple. So you get some Ptolemies, and also We get Cleopatra in Egypt. This is earlier than the famous one with Julius Caesar. That's not till like 50 BC. But there's Cleopatra gets to be kind of a family name here. Again, they're trying to maintain some, get some legitimacy with Egyptians. There we go. All right, so then we get this. The Ptolemies generally kind of leave things as they are. They're like, look, we're happy just controlling it. Give us your taxes and we'll be fine. The Seleucids decide are a little more aggressive on their Hellenistic campaigning, again trying to make everyone Greek, make the whole place one culture. And that kind of reaches its peak with this guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, whose name means God manifest. Again, nice humble name for a nice humble guy. So he desecrates the temple and sacks Jerusalem. But more importantly, the way he desecrates the temple is he brings a statue of Zeus into the courtyard and sacrifices a pig to it. So if you want to make the Jews unhappy, this is how you do it. You take a Greek god, put it in the temple, the holy place of God, and then you sacrifice a pig, an unclean animal, to it and desecrate the temple. So then we get the Maccabean revolt for the next 7 years or so. The Maccabees are a family of priests, so that's part of why they're able to. They get ticked and start taking things over. It starts as a guerrilla, kind of just a guerrilla war. Which again leads us into some of what's going on then at the time of Jesus, and they actually then they're willing to actually fight on the Sabbath. Otherwise, if you're a good Jew, you're not going to. Well, it's Sabbath, we got to take it off, so we're not going to attack anyone then. But then everyone knows that, and kind of still. Like what is it? The Yom Kippur War that Israel fought in what was that, 67 or 73? One of them that the surrounding Arab states go, oh, it's a high holy day for the Jews. Let's attack them then when they're at their lowest. Or Washington attacking the Prussians the day after Christmas when they're all drunk. Same idea. All right. So then, but one of the Maccabees killed in battle in 166. Then Judah or Judas Maccabeus takes control, leads the revolt in Jerusalem. They win and retake the temple in 164. They cleanse the temple. We get the Hanukkah story, of part of that, the oil from the lamp that doesn't run out. And then Judas Maccabeus dies in 160, but things aren't quite over yet. And so then they're nominally in control, and this is the genealogy of the Maccabees then who become the Hasmonean dynasty, that they're able to keep things under control for a bit, but we end up with Miriam and Herod the Great here, of course, from. All right. So the Maccabees are in control, but then later on, as often happens, then eventually you get two brothers who both think they should be in control, and decide to fight each other to figure out who gets to be in control. And one of them goes, "Oh, well, I need some help. Well, let's ask these Romans. They seem to be nice. Let's bring them in." And so then Roman general Pompey conquers Jerusalem in 63 BC after there's a civil war between Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. So between these two guys here. So there's civil war. Romans come in, use that as their excuse to come in and conquer things. But then they let these client kings come, like Herod, control things. Again, as long as the tax money is coming through, and you're not revolting, we'll be hands off. If you start revolting, or if the tax money stops coming, then we've got some legions we can send. All right, and so again, coming under the administration of governor. Judea was allowed a king. Governor's business was to regulate trade and maximize tax revenue. Again, keep the money flowing where things are fine. All right, so then again, Herod the Great, our friend from the Christmas story, is declared king of the Jews in 37 BC. His father had served Rome and the Hasmoneans, so that's how he gets to become king. And so he controlled this whole area of by himself. But then when he dies, then there's some concern over how he'd been managing things, and so we get his different sons and things in control of different areas. So the yellow area is where Herod Archelaus is in control. Orange is where Herod Antipas is in control. Purple here is where Philip the Tetrarch is in control. But then again, this middle part, this yellow part, Herod Archelaus can't keep things under control, so that's when they send in a direct Roman governor, who at the time of Jesus is Pilate.
So the Great, was that some kind of a title of some kind, or do we assign that to keep track of all the different Herods, or?
I mean, he's the one. I mean, he's king for 30 some years. He's the one who builds builds and expands the second temple to be the grand thing that it is. So a lot of building projects and things. Again, I'm trying to remember whether it's assigned to him by historians or whether he assigns it to himself. Yeah.
Knowing the ego of all those people, they could
Right.
easily assign it.
Yeah. Well, and remember too, when we look at Herod, and especially with the Christmas story and the slaughter of the innocents, you're wondering what kind of crazy guy would do that. Well, was it Josephus? Well, there's a Roman who said that it was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son, because in order to make sure he stayed in control, he realized his sons might try and take power, so he had several of them killed, and I think several more were supposed to be killed when he died, and then, but that didn't happen. Because he was king of the Jews and was trying to maintain a good relationship with the Jews, then he didn't eat pork, so pigs would be safe around him. Yeah, Jeanette.
So is that why we say that Christ was probably born in 4 BC?
Right. Yeah. So I guess so we run into this dating problem of, wait a minute, Chris, wasn't Jesus born in 0? Well, first off, there's a whole debate of whether you start with 0 or whether you just go from 1 BC to 1 AD. But also then the challenge is that when I'm blanking on who it was at the moment, started the calendar that we use today. And it probably would have been the Julian one. So it would have been a Roman. That dates back and calculates things back to things, but then we later realized that Herod the Great died in 4 BC, so Christmas story probably didn't happen in 0 or 1, it happened earlier, so we're off a few years, is the short version there. Because if Herod the Great's so involved, if he dies in 4 BC, he can't be ordering slaughters of villages in 180.
Yeah.
They're a little hard to anyway. So, and the wise men can't meet with him. That kind of thing. So that's why date Christmas stuff to 4 or sometimes even 6 BC, so we can still order the 2-year-olds killed in 4 BC and then die. And then there's the time between when Joseph and Mary, Jesus flee to Egypt, and then Herod dies, and then they can safely go back to Galilee, because where's that map? There. Because Galilee's not under the control of the same, is Herod Antipas, not Herod Archelaus, so it's safer there for them up in Galilee than it would be in Judea, so they go back to Nazareth.
Maybe the 4 BC is wrong.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah, so again, that's why maybe 6 BC would be when Christmas is, and then 4 BC is when the wise men come and everything before he dies. But
Technically, Jesus lived 4 BC to about 29 AD.
well, see that's the other question. The most of the time we date Jesus. John gives us 3-year ministry because we have 3 cycles of festivals in John. So that's why we think Jesus' ministry is 3 years long. And then his crucifixion's dated to either 30 or 33 AD. Both of those years sort of work in terms of how the Passover is described and all that sort of stuff. And there's some good arguments for both of those. But again, because it's this fun backwater province, the Romans aren't keeping track of, oh, we killed another would-be Messiah.
Yeah.
You know, not at that point. All right, so then Herod's son, Herod Archelaus, is the ethnarch title, ruler of nations of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea for about 10 years. So again, Idumea is the little area south of Judea there. All right. All right, and then there's a guy named Judas of Galilee who's involved in uprisings both in 4 BC and in 6 AD. Wherever I copied it from used the CE stuff, so I forgot to change it. Because you can't use, Jesus stuff anymore. It's all BCE, before Common Era, or Common Era, instead of AD, instead of the year of our Lord. But again, also because, Jesus wasn't born in 0 then. But all right. So Judas, he's a Jewish leader, leads resistance to the census that was used in for Roman tax purposes, and so that was just an example. Then you get, because the Romans are concerned about the taxes, and really as long as they're getting their money, they let people. I mean, we talk about it with tax collectors all the time, but the people going up from there. Can skim off more. As long as Rome gets what it wants, it doesn't care what happens to any excess stuff. And so the peasants don't always like getting taxed. I mean, we still don't like getting taxed. So they try and revolt, and usually doesn't work well for them in the end. All right. Then the other big thing so in addition to all this political, historical stuff that's going on, that then provides some of the background for what's happened. So you've got overall the summer is, since Alexander the Great conquered everything, everyone's speaking Greek and reading Greek. Greek's a trade language. Romans come in and conquer things and build big, good roads and keep the peace so people can travel, and so the word can spread for Jesus well. That kind of thing. But we also then get this thing called the Septuagint. Who knows what the Septuagint is? All right.
First 5 books.
Nope, that's Pentateuch. Close.
7 something.
70. It's 70 or 72. Because so it's the so again, yes. You got your prefix right. It's abbreviated LXX because it's 70. It's the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Comes from the word for 70 because 70 or 72, depending on the story. Elders in Alexandria did the work. Again, translated between about 200 and 150 BC because most Jews were then speaking Aramaic or Koine Greek, not Hebrew anymore. So, let me go back to one of the fun Alexander maps. Here we go. All right. So again, the Jews have, always kind of traveled a bit, but then, especially with Greeks coming through, Romans coming through, you had a sizable Jewish enclave in Alexandria, Egypt. That's part of why Joseph, Mary, and Jesus could flee to Egypt. They wouldn't be the only Jews there. There was already a good community there. There's actually still a Jewish community there to this day, somewhat. But in any case, so Alexandria, of course, is a major seaport. You've got lots of people coming in through, and so that's where they decide, hey, we need a Greek translation of the Old Testament because we're working in Greek all the time. Most people, if they don't speak pure Hebrew anymore, they speak Aramaic. So.
The first Lutheran Bible translators.
Right, there we go. All right, so again, between 200 and 150 BC is when this happens. And so why is that? Why do we care? Why is that important for us? Well, part of it is that then most, if not all, of the Old Testament quotations or citations in the New Testament are from the Septuagint, because it's already in Greek. So then you don't have to bother mentally translating things. And we can tell that because of how the Greek works, and how certain terms, because Hebrew and Greek have different words for different things, and you have different nuances depending on things. Then there's you can kind of tell that it's Septuagint, not direct from the Hebrew. All right. Any questions, comments, thoughts on that? All right, that's also then where we get these books called the Apocrypha, and we've talked about them some before. But again, they're books written during the intertestamental time that were included in the Septuagint, but not held to the same level as the Old Testament. And that's part of why we know also that we don't hold them to the same level as the Old Testament, because there's not Hebrew originals for any of these apocryphal books. They're all just written originally in Greek. Examples of some of those books include the Maccabees, which talks about those Maccabees who did the revolt against the Hasmoneans. But they did, one's kind of straight. First one's more straight history. The second one's kind of more melodramatic history and inspiring people to martyr themselves fighting against the evil oppressors. You get Judith, who's a feminine heroine like Esther. Also, the Apocrypha does include longer versions of Esther and Daniel. There's an extra psalm in there. Probably the main thing that we do here that do it when we sing that song of the three young men that's in our hymnal. That is from the Apocrypha. That's supposed to be the song that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego sang after they're saved from the furnace, praising God. All right, and then Baruch is the name of Jeremiah's secretary, and talks about adherence to the Torah and resisting paganism. He had a lot of that kind of stuff too, because again, you've got this more cultural pressure of we need to become Greek, or we need to become Roman. How do we remain Jewish while doing that? And part of it, is we need to maintain our connections and things. So, all right, and then what we get also then is what's your question?
Those three books you just talked about, Maccabees 1, 2, and Baruch, were those in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or
so? I'm trying to remember whether those were included in the Dead Sea Scrolls or not. I don't think so, because they were Greek. But that we'll get to them. We're getting to the Dead Sea Scrolls here in a second. So then some of how we know what's going on, and then what's happening in Israel as we get closer to Jesus, is we get kind of this development of these, three theological parties within Judaism, or three main ones anyway. Of course, we hear about the Pharisees and the Sadducees a lot with Jesus. The Pharisees are the ones who are, again, most concerned with religious purity. The Sadducees are more open to working with the Greeks on things, more politically savvy, that kind of thing. The big difference between those two is that the Pharisees believe in a resurrection, the Sadducees don't, in general. So there's a couple spots where in the New Testament where they, well, that's why the Sadducees are the ones who ask Jesus. So there's this woman, she marries a guy, he dies, so she marries the brother, and so on and so on. Whose husband is she, or whose wife is she in the resurrection? They don't believe in the resurrection, so they think the whole thing's ridiculous. But they can use that question to try and trap Jesus. And then later on, after Jesus dies and rises again, and I think it's either Peter or John before the Sanhedrin, before the religious council. Once he starts talking about the resurrection, then that gets the Pharisees and Sadducees arguing with each other about the resurrection and forgetting about why they're angry at Peter for preaching about Jesus. So, the third group is the Essenes, ascetic celibates. They lived in the desert studying the law. They're the source of the Dead Sea Scrolls. People will see connections between the Essenes and John the Baptist, that they're trying to connect him just in terms of message and in terms of lifestyle. John seems to have fit with the Essenes some. Because we find the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, which is this nice, wonderfully vibrant area around the Dead Sea, which is part of why we can find scrolls that are 2,000 years old in these things. So they're hidden in caves that no one's disturbing. You know, the only people who lived out there were these religious wackos. These people who were waiting for the end of the world to come, separating themselves from society as much as they could, and so they had all the copies of the Old Testament, as well as some of their own writings, some of which sounds really into the worldy stuff, because they're sealed in jars. They're in this dry area. No one's bothering them. It all comes together that way. That's why we're able to find them. Then when these shepherd boys throw a rock into the cave, hear pottery break in, go, we should see what this is. All right, and so then they find things like the Isaiah scroll. They find copies of, I think, almost every Old Testament book. They might not find Esther, if I'm remembering right. But and from what they've been able to gather and check and see, then before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1945, the oldest copies of the Old Testament we had access to were 1,000 years old. But the Dead Sea Scrolls get us back to the time of Jesus, and then, of course, that's great in some ways, because then we can see from their commentaries and things, we can kind of get an idea of what's going on. There are people who go, John has to have been written so much later because these themes of light and darkness wouldn't have been present in Judaism at the time of Jesus. And then we find these Dead Sea Scrolls and find this scroll, the battle of light and darkness, and go, okay, I think it's here. And then we find too that then what we had in 1,000 years old compared to what we found 2,000 years old, really very similar. Usually there were minor scribal errors were the main differences. Reminded that these things were, the Bible was copied and preserved, faithfully. Again, so Dead Sea Scrolls community discovered the scrolls, lived out around the Dead Sea. They were trying to escape from the pagan world, and John the Baptist kind of seems like he would have been that kind of group, fit with that kind of group. All right, let's see. So that kind of covers a quick overview of what happens in that intertestamental time. We could dive into a lot of more detail on some of this, but good quick overview while we're in between things here too. So, any final questions, thoughts, comments? All right, then next week, Judy will talk about Vacation Bible School in Hong Kong and share her experiences there. And then we'll start with our fall series after that. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, I've got a couple ideas, but let me know if you've got any thoughts, and we'll see what we do. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was a quick one.